please start recording? Thank you, Bradley. I would like to mention to everybody that this was called for an in-person meeting in Westboro, but with the number of people attending this meeting from the South Shore, I chatted with Jared about it and we decided to make it a Zoom meeting. I certainly hope I didn't offend any commission members by making it a Zoom meeting, but traffic getting to the South Shore 4th of July week, you pay the price. So that being said, that's all I've got. So we'll move on to the review of the July 25 business meeting agenda. Any amendments?
Ray, I can
I'm sorry, we need a roll
attendance.
call vote. Roll call on attendance.
Yes.
So Brad, you can call it because you've got the members there.
Sure. So Ray Kane,
Here,
Bill Doyle,
he's absent. He texted me this morning and he had an emergency enforcement issue down at Plymouth Harbor. So he apologized for not making the meeting.
Shelley Edmondson,
Here.
Suki Sawyer,
Here.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Good morning, here.
Eric Nelson,
Here.
Khalil Bogdan,
Here.
Dan McKiernan.
Here, but technically I'm not a commission member. Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
And I would be curious to know if Tom O'Shea is online with us this morning.
I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Shea.
Thank you.
Okay, I can move this along then, the review of the 25 business meeting agenda. Any changes to today's agenda? Any hands, Bradley?
No hands.
Then we can move this right along. Review of the July, review and approval of the May 25 draft business meeting minutes. Any edits? If not, if no hands go up, I'm going to need a motion seconded.
Well, here I move to approve the May 25th draft minutes.
And I need a second.
I'll second it, Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Khalil. I don't believe we need a roll call on that.
No, I don't think so.
No, according to Jared's instructions, I'm not seeing it up there. Okay, we can move this along. Who's on board from law enforcement today? Is that Lieutenant Bass or?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt, please? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
I do believe that when we're Zoom, we do have to have with each motion a roll call.
Well,
I may be wrong, but I believe
I'm not reading that on my instructions by
Okay.
Jared, but if that will suit your fancy, by all means. Bradley, can you call a roll call vote?
Yes, I can for the minutes as written.
For
Ray
May?
Kane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Ray, right?
Yes.
Shelley,
Yes.
Suki,
Yes.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
I was not present, so I'm going to abstain.
Eric Nelson.
I also was not present, so I'll abstain.
Thank you. And Khalil Bogdan.
yes.
Okay, we're all set.
We're good to go, Bradley.
Yes.
So who's speaking on behalf of law enforcement today?
Mr. Chairman, that would be myself, Matt Bass.
Oh, good morning, Lieutenant Bass. How are you?
Good morning. Good, thanks. So I'll try to be brief. I think there's been some curiosity. We are still looking to have a new colonel appointed, I believe, from the rumor mill. I think it's been offered, but it's still in the works, so nothing's official. So I think we're going to have to wait and punt that to the next meeting where I can fill everybody in. Recently, we did have a meeting with a bunch of different agencies regarding some issues at the Bill Russell Bridge in in Boston. And what I thought was curious there is people didn't realize that this is in regards to striped bass issues, that we do have a number of canine units within our department, and one of them, Hank, which is assigned to Sergeant Mike Cody, is certified as a tracking dog, evidence recovery, as well as finding striped bass. It's nationally certified to do that, so people kind of wasn't known to people, so I just figured I'd mention that. Some of the recent cases, we just were in court finally for a lobster case in P-Town that happened in March. The court did award us the liable for, I think we're in excess of $12,000 for that. And I think also some eyebrows were raised from some questions in the last meeting about what we can do with some more serious violations. And I'd mentioned a ticket I wrote for $7,600, taking advantage of that $10 per fish. Well, I've been beaten out by that recently. It might have made the news, a marine fisheries case in Westport where a vessel was boarded. And after the officers did all the math with the undersize and over limit to togs, sea bass, fluke, scup, they wrote the individuals each non-criminal citations, and that totaled $51,700. So we'll see how that plays out in the court. People are typically think arrest is the best ways to go, but I think literally with this new fine schedule, we're getting a bigger bang for the buck that way. But that's all I have. If there's any questions.
Questions for Lieutenant Bass? Any hands, Bradley?
I'm not seeing any hands.
Thank you, Bradley. Commissioner Tom O'Shea, I'm turning the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. I want to point out we have a new commission member, Eric Nelson, who has replaced Tim Brady, who, as you know, his last meeting was last month, and Tim had decided to step down as he's starting to work towards retirement. But Tim, I just want to point out, Tim was always a great member of the commission, and certainly Tim represented the Stellwagen Bank Charter Association and the for-hire charter people in general out there. And we'll certainly miss Tim, though. Tim is still involved. He is on the Commercial Fisheries Commission. But anyway, just wanted to share our thanks and appreciation for Tim's service. And I just want to welcome Eric. So let me give you a quick intro about Eric. And in many ways, I think, Eric fills that role also that Tim held, relative to Eric's a lifelong saltwater fisherman and active charter captain operating out of Essex, Essex River Charters, fishing charters. In addition to hiring for hire chartering, he fishes commercially for striped bass, has experience fishing for other species, including mackerel, bluefish, cod, haddock, and flounder. He brings 40 years of environmental consulting experience as a coastal geologist and has worked on a number of projects in Massachusetts and for municipalities, organizations for coastal restoration, evaluation of sea level rise impacts, climate change adaptation, vulnerability assessments, infrastructure and permitting of coastal projects. So Eric brings a lot of coastal experience, I think, to the role. And, I think he'll bring a real commitment, not only to, the recreational fishery, but also really bringing a perspective on conservation, marine biodiversity and sustainability, and, really getting people engaged in fishing from all backgrounds. And with that, Eric, do you want to introduce yourself and add anything I've missed?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I don't have much else to add. I think you did a great job saying a lot of things I might have said myself. But yeah, I've been around the water my whole life. I've seen a lot of changes during that time. I hope to be able to make a contribution to this group, and I'm honored to be part of the group, but I realize I have a lot to learn and plan to do a lot of listening as well as contributing where I'm able to. That's about it.
Thank you, Eric.
Eric, welcome aboard, and hopefully at our next in-person meeting, we'll all get to meet you in person.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry for interrupting, Tom.
Not a problem, Ray. I do have some remarks to give relative to last month's vote and then some other updates. If you'll allow me to continue, I will
By
do
all
that.
means, the floor is yours.
Great. I guess I'll start off first by saying, unfortunately, I was not able to attend last month's MFAC meeting due to a prior conflict in my schedule. However, I was and am concerned with the potential impact of the commission's vote at the last meeting of 3-2 against the repeal of the minimum lobster size increases in Lobster Management Area 1. From what I understand, if the emergency regulations are not approved, this could hurt nearly 600 Massachusetts lobster fishers and put them at an economic disadvantage with Maine and New Hampshire lobster fishers. So you'll recall that, when I spoke at the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association's annual meeting in January, I did emphasize that it's important that our lobster fishers in all 3 states follow the same lobster rules and not have Massachusetts fishers face stricter regulations. And at that time, I think we heard broad support for that statement. On February 4th, the Lobster Management Board of the ASMFC voted to repeal the minimum lobster size increases. And Massachusetts delegation voted with the majority at that time, 7-1, with 3 abstentions, to repeal the proposed size increase that was scheduled to be effective on July 1st, today, 2025. And as a response to that vote from the Lobster Management Board, DMF then issued emergency regulations to align Massachusetts rules with those in Maine, New Hampshire, and other coastal states. So because of the broad support we had heard and received from the lobster fishers at the January meeting in the vote of the ASMFC's Lobster Management Board to repeal the minimum size increase, I have to say that last month's vote from the MFAC against the repeal was unexpected by many, including myself. I do understand, however, that some of the members voted in opposition because the emergency regulations did not include an exception on V-notch possession limits for the 35 active state-level permit holders from the Outer Cape. Now, I do want to bring up, and that we'll all remember, the reason that DMF's emergency regulations did not include an exemption on those V-notch possession limits for the Outer Cape Cod state-only permit holders is because the ASMFC had previously eliminated the exemption and did not vote to repeal its elimination. So the Massachusetts delegation, you remember, did vote in favor of the exemption for the Outer Cape Cod state-level permit holders, while 8 other states voted against the exemption, with NOAA Fisheries and Maine abstaining in the vote 1-8-2. So given all that, the Division of Marine Fisheries has requested that the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission renew a motion today to approve as final the emergency regulations that implement Addendum 32 to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission Interstate Fishery Management Plan for American lobster. The emergency regulations are scheduled to expire on July 27th, 2025. And swift action by the MFAC is needed to ensure our industry is not placed at a competitive disadvantage. We urge your consideration and adoption of 7 emergency regulations as outlined in the memo from myself and the director to the MFAC. So that's something I again would underscore. And then my only other comment is to update everybody that the Biodiversity Executive Order report is in the governor's office under review, hoping for an announcement sometime in August or September at this point, but we're excited about that. And we also had the announcement of the Environmental Bond Bill, which is the Mass Ready Act. And within that, there was some really good authorizations that I think will help us in the marine habitat restoration side. And I'm hopeful that our capital investment plan will include over the next 2 years, $1.5 million for marine habitat restoration for DMF to lead. So excited about that. Those are all my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Questions for the Commissioner? Bradley, any hands?
No hands.
No hands. Thank you, Commissioner Tom O'Shea.
Thank you.
Moving us along, I'll turn the floor over to Director Dan McKiernan.
Thank you, Ray, and good morning, everyone. I'd also like to welcome our newest member, Eric Nelson. Eric joined a call with Jared and I. We gave him a thorough explanation of the commission and sort of a modern look at fisheries management and how the commission fits into that relative to rulemaking and policy advising, the integration of the commission relative to ASMFC plans or Mid-Atlantic Council votes, New England Council votes, et cetera. So we're really looking forward to working more with Eric in the future, and we welcome him to join us in our Gloucester facility that's undergoing renovation, but I think we're just about done with that. So we're going to have a meeting with him up there and introduce him to some of the staff there. I'd also like to thank Bradley, who's running the meeting today, filling in for Jared, who's away. Since our last meeting on May 29th, DMF held a fabulously and to some degree, for some of us, surprisingly successful public event at our Cat Cove Marine Lab. It was called Marine Quest, and it was organized by Dr. Gary Nelson of our Salem staff, who back in the 1990s worked for the state of Florida. And there they held a similar event for the public to learn about what the marine fisheries agencies do and provide some kind of fun activities for families. The event had a target audience of, I would say, middle school and slightly older kids, with some stuff for the younger kids as well. And despite the weather being a little marginal, we had over 500 people attend, and this was mostly families. Highlights of the event included touch tanks and live specimens within the Cat Cove Marine Lab, because we do have a seawater system there. And many of the staff had scoured around and picked up some really interesting, living sea creatures for families and kids to examine and touch. And it was really, really great. The horseshoe crabs were a big draw, both adults and also some tiny 1-year-olds. And these 1-year-olds are the size of a dime. And they're really fascinating. Derek Perry is quite good at finding those youngest horseshoe crabs. And so for kids to see something as small as a dime and something as big as a dinner plate, it was a great contrast. It was really fun. The lectures in our lab were presented by our biologists, including, Derek Perry on horseshoe crabs, Tracy Pugh on lobsters, Ben Gahagan on striped bass, Chrissy Pettypass on shellfish, and of course, I think we asked Greg Scommel to speak twice because of the draw of sharks and white sharks. And the programs and projects that DMF were represented with, there was so many fun activities for the kids. And one of the highlights, I have to admit, another one was the green crab races, which we borrowed from Shelley Edmondson's annual Meet the Fleet event. And that was super fun. And I think we hope to do this again, of course. Finally, I'm guessing that it might have inspired, some of these kids to maybe become marine biologists one day. It won't surprise me if 10, 15 years from now, someone says, oh, when I was in 5th grade, I attended a great event at that Salem facility. So, it was good. When you talk about diversifying, some of the workforce and getting, different groups involved in marine fisheries, it's usually too late, if you're trying to turn them on to marine science by the time, they get into high school, even college, and it's critical to inspire them at these younger ages. I'd also like to just thank Gary Nelson and his team for all the upfront work that they did, and to make that such a great event. And you were there for a fairly long time, enjoying yourself. Any feedback from you?
Yeah, I enjoyed it and brought my family there. My son, who's 11, really, he said, oh, this was great. This was a lot of fun. thanks for, getting me to go to this. I was there and also talked to Commissioner Heupel from DEP, who was there with her daughter. Everybody just had a great time. I mean, with the touch tanks, learning from biologists directly, the fishing clinics. They had, like the kelp room in there with, a lot of microscopes and organisms. They had the green crab races. The seafood was delicious. The presentations on sharks from Greg Scommel and Tracy Pugh on lobsters and Derek on horseshoe crabs and Chrissy on shellfish and the touch tanks and Bob Glenn and Dan got in there themselves. They were helping kids learn about stuff. Then there was the diving crew, right? Had the kids putting on the ventilators or whatever and dunking their heads in and also I should say it was a partnership, right, with Salem Sound Coast Watch, Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, UMass Boston, the MLA.
Don't forget MLA.
The MLA was there with Dave Cassoni. So anyway, I think that basically DMF's committed themselves to doing this now. It's such a success. So Dan, kudos to you and the team.
Yeah, well, all goes south. Hello to the staff. Barry Nelson did such a great job with it, and it started at 10, and at 5 minutes past 10, we were looking at each other saying, is anybody coming to this party? And then they all showed up in large amounts and trickled in all day. So we were really pleased. Neil McCoy of our outreach staff, I think, worked hard to get it out into various social media venues, including maybe the Boston Globe had something about, fun things for families that, for free, so that was kind of cool. So, I mean, we can improve on it in the future, but overall great success for sure. Right. So much for the happy news. Over the last 2 weeks, I've spent considerable time working with the Attorney General's office, preparing motions in 2 court cases concerning the regulations that went into effect today regarding V-notch possession for out-of-Cape state-only permit holders. DMF staff sent to all of you yesterday some documents, not all of them, but we just tried to give you a flavor for what arguments are being made. In the federal case, the plaintiffs requested the court to reopen a lawsuit that was filed over 25 years ago as a means to block the regulations, and we expect a decision tomorrow from the federal court. And in the second case, which is in the state court, the plaintiffs are seeking a preliminary injunction to prevent the regulations from being enforced. And there's a hearing this afternoon in Barnstable District Court. Because of all of this active litigation and today's discussions, I'm going to try to keep my comments to a minimum on the issue of the V-notch regulation. So that's just the way I think we need to proceed today. Finally, on the topic of lobster management, Maine is conducting a survey of all of its lobster permit holders to assess their views about the stock status, but more importantly, about preferred ways to manage the fishery in the future. DMF and New Hampshire are going to follow suit with similar surveys. We've obtained Maine surveys, so we're going to repeat many of the same questions, although in Maine, there's only one LMA, it's Area 1, although they do have zones. They break their state up into zones. So we are going to emulate that survey, bring forward some of the same questions, but obviously because we have 3 lobster management areas in state waters, unlike Maine, which has only one, and New Hampshire has only one, we'll have to modify that survey slightly to accommodate the other lobster management areas. And then, of course, there's Area 3, which is the federal area way offshore for the trick boats. But I think this is going to be helpful in further discussions, as many of you know, when Maine and New Hampshire reneged on the gauge increases, the ASMFC asked them to conduct meetings, with the industry. And, I don't want to speak for Maine, but I think the issue there is they want to see if they can have all of the participants or all the permit holders, speak up on some of these issues, and maybe not just those who might go to hearings. So that's my update. That particular survey we'll probably be sending out by the end of July. Maine's on a similar schedule, so that when the results come back, we can present these to not only the ASMSC at their fall meeting, but to this commission. So we can maybe get a good profile of the attitudes of the commercial fishery participants. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I can take any
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you, Director McKiernan. Questions for the director? Bradley,
I'm not
Any
seeing any hands.
you're seeing no hands. Then we're going to move on to action item. The renewal of the recommendation on regulations to implement addendum 32 to the lobster fishery management plan.
Mhm.
So I'm going to want a motion on the board, and I'm going to want it seconded, and then we'll open it up to discussion.
Mr. Chairman, Khalil here.
You're recognized, Khalil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that I move to the motion that has been presented regarding addendum 32.
Thank you, Khalil. I need a second.
Raymond, can we get the motion up on the board, or Bradley, can you bring up that the PowerPoint slide?
Mr. Chair, it's Chris. I will second Khalil's motion.
Thank you, Chris. Now the floor is open to discussion on this recommendation. And Brad.
Yeah, Raymond, if I could just supply a little bit more information on this first slide.
Yes, by all means, Director.
Yeah, thank you. I just, previous slide, Bradley, I just want to stress, if there's any confusion, that even though you're called the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, you have the authority to approve or reject my proposals. And without your approval, no regulation governing times, places, quantities, method can be enacted by the division. The particular rule that we're talking about today was done by emergency, which means I get to do that without your input, but only for 90 days. And so I just want to make it clear, and I think it's most people understand that, but I just want you to know that when the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission was created in 1960, it was created to investigate the problems within marine fisheries and make recommendations, kind of like broad scale policy issues. But the commission was then codified into state law as an entity that approves the director's proposals without the name change. So in the history of the commission, there's sometimes been a little bit of not confusion, but a lack of clarity that even though the word says advisory, you have a critical role, and without your approval, proposals from the director don't go forward. So next slide. You've seen this slide before, and it's captured in the memo. In essence, it's going to continue that which we did by emergency, and that which is consistent with New Hampshire and Maine's approach, which was to repeal the minimum size changes in Area 1, along with the requisite vent size increases that were going to be on its own schedule. But in addition, the other size limit that was in Addendum 27, which was repealed by 32 by the subsequent addendum, had to do with Outer Cape Cod and a maximum of gauge increase. And then furthermore, there was going to be a reduction in the maximum size for Area 3 and Outer Cape from the 6 3/4 down to 6.5 inches, I think like 4 or 5 years out. So all of that gets removed. And so, the memo has been well drafted, and the message in there is sort of concise and clear. But just to summarize, the fact that it's this late in the game, it makes it difficult for the gauge increases to go forward, especially given the sort of the lack of available gauges and also the impacts on the recreational fishery, because we've been, quietly advising the recreational community for months now that that gauge increase, which we announced around the first of the year, wasn't going forward. So it's very important to me as the director, and Tom, obviously, based on his words, to implement this as a final rule so that we can have uniformity within the LMAs. But fishermen within the LMA are going to have consistent rules within the LMA. So I think that's really important. And then the other, so it didn't address the VNOTch issue, and it also left the, when I say it, the ASMFC didn't repeal the VNOTch issue for the state-only permit holders, nor did it change the lobster trap tag rules, because both of those rules were inconsistent among states within the same LMA. What I mean by that is Maine was issuing only 800 tags, or up to 800 tags for all of its lobster permit holders, but New Hampshire and Mass were adding 10% at the time of purchase of the tags. And so effective this year, we're also only issuing the number of tags. However, I did get an exemption from that for Area 2 and Outer Cape Cod, since so many of those fishermen have low trap allocations, and many of them fish single traps, which are more prone to gear loss. And so we thought it would be appropriate to get relief from that 10% provision, or the elimination of the 10% extra tax for those two fleets. So next slide. So anyway, you've seen this slide before. This is what we're is going to be in effect as a result of your vote. Let's go back to the previous slide, Bradley. If there's any questions, we can go through these, but I'll stop there and hope the commission will approve this, and we can have a discussion.
So questions for the director on this slide on DMF's recommendation. Are there any questions amongst members of the commission for the director? Bradley?
Not seeing any hands.
Thank you. I guess we can move on to the next slide.
Well, actually, the question is, do you need us to go over the that matrix with the crossed out text? Does everybody understand what the ramifications would be?
That's the next slide.
Sure. Go ahead, Bradley.
Are there questions about this slide? Emergency rules under addendum 32. Bradley, any hands?
No hands.
Thank you. Where would you like to go from here, Dan?
We have a motion and a second. If there's no commission discussion, then we can proceed to a vote.
All right, so should I open it up to discussion if there is any discussion?
Certainly, yes.
Bill Amaru raised his
Bill,
hand.
you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director McKiernan. Before I begin my comments, I would like to ask the chair if it would be okay if I read a text message I received over the weekend from a fisherman on Cape Cod.
The floor is yours, Bill.
Thank you. This is a text message I received from an Outer Cape Cod lobsterman. I will read it. Quote, I figured I'd just give you an update of what I saw today out on the water. That way, when you're sitting in the meeting on the 1st of July, you have an idea what they've done to us. We're about 36 hours away from this looming and unnecessary regulation. Today, we landed 451 pounds. Roughly 1/3 of that would have gone over the side under the new regulation that we'd be having to operate from. concerning the V-notch aspect of the rule. We released an additional 900 pounds of brown eggers. Most of them are marked or scarred on the flipper in one way or form of another. I spoke with another fisherman who was in the same area as me today, and he agreed it's going to be a devastating move for state-only Outer Cape Cod permit holders. Definitely going to be days when 30% of the catch goes back because of this, and we will be back out there tomorrow, milling around in the black fog again, going through the same thing. This is going to cause great pain to the state water Outer Cape Cod fishery, without a doubt. That's close quote. So, notwithstanding all of the points that the director just made about the necessity of following the addendum, and I understand the sacrifice that it'll place on other fishers, sacrifice being nothing new to New England fishermen and lobstermen, especially those located in the southeast portion of Cape Cod who have lost several of their fisheries already and operate at a tremendous disadvantage. So I'm going to continue to propose and will support the defeat of this motion, because I don't believe that it's a good thing to be taking away operating regulations which were industry-based, scientifically proven, and accepted by management for over 25 years, to succumb to the requirements of managers who locate themselves hundreds and hundreds of miles away from our region and seem to need to have unanimity as part of the way that they prosecute their regulations. I don't think that that's the right way to be doing it. We have a bottom-up regulation system with its Outer Cape management area that has worked. We have a resource that's in good health, and I simply will not agree to support the motion.
Thank you, Bill. Any other hands, Bradley?
Suki Sawyer.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. I just want to make a general statement about where we are today. The commission was forewarned and the DMF back when all this started to not take any steps until Maine took their steps. So here we are today because we implemented these rules, and we have to sit here and have a debate about whether the other 600 guys in Area 1 that fish are going to be punished because they couldn't resolve this Outer Cape thing on its own. Again, we rushed to judgment to put this in place in Massachusetts, pretty much knowing anybody that was familiar with all this, knowing that Maine was not going to do it. So now we have to have this vote today to either punish all the guys in Area 1 to try to help the guys in Outer Cape. It's too much to ask, I think. I wish that the state had just dealt with the Outer Cape issue on its own and left the rest of the industry out of it, but that's not the way it's worked out. So I'm probably going to vote in favor of the motion today, but it's very disheartening to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Suki. Any hands, Bradley?
Khalil.
Neil, you're Eric? Is that who you said? Eric Nelson?
No, sorry, Khalil.
Khalil, you're recognized. Khalil, you must be muted.
Thank you, Mr. Director, and thank you, Bradley. This question is for Director McKiernan. With Maine being, I'm going to use the word out of compliance, I guess. And if New Hampshire's out of compliance, what are the ramifications for a state being out of compliance, such as Maine? Since Suki mentioned Maine, what are the implications and the ramifications of the state not supporting the addendum?
Thanks for that question. So any state can have more restrictive rules than a management plan addendum or amendment, and nobody blinks. So, and there are plenty of examples of that in lobster management as well as in other species. So if the commission doesn't approve this today, it does not put us out of compliance, because what's in play here is the rollback of the minimum size increases. It's the rollback of the vent size increases, and it's the rollback of the maximum size increases for Area 3 and Outer Cape Cod. So if the commission were to not vote for it, and the rules were to go in back to Addendum 27, that's not a problem for the commission. It would just mean that we would have more restrictive rules. It's when you have less restrictive rules that the state can be found out of compliance by the species board, and then that gets elevated higher and potentially could go to the Secretary of Commerce, and the fishery could be shut down. But there's many steps between being out of compliance and having the fishery sort of managed by the federal government, and I don't think that would happen. But in this case, there would be no non-compliance issues, because it's strictly about the size increases and the vent increases.
Okay, let me ask another question, if I may, Director McKiernan. We have 700 plus or minus lobstermen in Massachusetts, and we have the group from the outer Cape. Why not have the entire state, the lobstermen, operate under the regulations that the Outer Cape have? Is there an issue with that? In other words, what I'm trying to say is that it seems like the Outer Cape operates under one set of rules, regardless of whether it was scientifically sound or not back in 2000. And then the rest of the lobstermen operate under a different set of rules. Is there a reason why we do that?
Well, it's a reason why the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission does it, and it has to do with back in 1998, when Amendment 3 was first passed. It divided the coast into 7 lobster management areas and created lobster conservation management teams, so that each of those areas could potentially have unique regulations. And I would not want to reverse 27 years of history, because there are many businesses that have that are well established and have grown up in light of these rules, and these rules are quite different. So, for example, in Area 1, we don't have license specific trap limits. Every Area 1 permit gets to fish 800 traps. And that's in contrast to, say, Area 2, Area 3, and Outer Cape Cod, where the trap limit is permit specific based on that permit holder's history. In addition, there are different biological measures that were accepted and embraced by the various LCMTs and adopted as final rules. So, for example, Area 1 has a smaller minimum size than the other areas at 3 1/4 inches. They also have a maximum size of 5 inches. And that is, those kinds of rules were not embraced by the Outer Cape Cod lobstermen, nor Area 2 or Area 3. So, this arrangement of having areas with highly disparate rules is part of the legacy of lobster management, and it's I believe for the good of the order that should be maintained. And as Tom pointed out earlier, and also Tom O'Shea, and also back in January, what we're interested in is having rules that are consistent within the LMA. And so that means if New Hampshire and Maine are not going to raise that minimum size, we don't think we should either. And consistent with having the same rules within an LMA, we have in the Outer Cape Cod, we have the federal permit holders, which have that 1/8 inch, whereas the state-only permit holders have that 1/4 inch, and that was probably the reason that the lobster board didn't embrace suspending that one, because I think around the region, that's a theme that I think is pretty sellable, that fishermen within a lobster management area should be fishing under common rules. And people are comfortable to some degree about fishermen and across, that LMAs having different rules, but I think there's a consensus that within the LMA, the rules should be more consistent.
Okay, and thank you, Director. Let me get back to the ASMFC meeting when there was a motion made, I believe, by the Massachusetts delegation, and it never received a second. And obviously, if a delegation makes a motion or moves a motion, they themselves cannot second that motion. Is there a reason why that motion was never seconded?
Yeah, I want to apologize for some misinformation on that narrative. I went back and read the minutes of that February meeting, and actually there was a second. It was a second from the state of New Hampshire's director, and she seconded the motion made by the Massachusetts, by one of the members of the Massachusetts delegation, Ray specifically. And she did that second for quote unquote discussion purposes. Now, the question you ask is, can two members of the same delegation work to make a motion and then approve the motion? The answer is no. When someone from a state delegation makes a motion, the second has to come from a different jurisdiction.
I understood that. I said that previously, that the delegation who makes the motion cannot second it. I was under the assumption it was never seconded, and that.
Yeah, and I wrote that in a memo, Khalil, and I was wrong. And so I just want to, set the record straight that there was a second, but then when it was up for a vote, as Tom mentioned earlier, it was only Massachusetts in favor, and eight jurisdictions opposed it, and 2 jurisdictions abstained.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Director.
Questions for the director?
We have a hand from Suki.
Suki, you recognize. Or is that hand from his previous discussion?
Yeah, that ain't in my hand. I thought I put my hand down right. Thanks, sorry.
Thank you, Suki. Any other hands raised, Bradley?
Hand from Chris McGuire.
Chris, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question through you to the director. Apologies that I wasn't able to participate in the meeting in May. As I just want to make sure I understand the conversation that we're having here. So I heard Captain Amaru's description of the V-notch, the sort of challenges around the V-notch, but in my reading of what we're doing today, that's actually not what we're talking about. So I believe that if the commission votes this up or down, it doesn't change the V-notch rules. And I just want to make sure that that's correct, because it sounds like that was the reason why Captain Amaru was opposed to this motion. And I don't think that this motion actually addresses that, but I want to make sure that I understand correctly.
You're correct on both counts. I think the commission members last month who voted in opposition expressed their frustration that the V-notch rule wasn't part of the emergency action, and then you were right that this rule change that went into the emergency with that I'm seeking to make permanent is simply the alterations or the amendments to the minimum size changes and maximum size changes, as well as the escape fence. So you're absolutely right. If the commission were to reject approving these as final, there would be no change to the VNOTCH regulations by following the state rulemaking process. Now, I mentioned that there's 2 court cases that are litigating that, but that's completely independent. We're defendants in those cases.
Okay, so if the commission were to vote this down, in essence, the effect is that all Massachusetts fishermen would be subject to a gauge increase that no other lobster fishermen on the Atlantic coast are subject to. And if the commission were to approve this motion, the gauge would stay the same for Massachusetts and basically everyone else. Is that
Yeah,
the
but just,
decision that we're making?
yes, but with a slight clarification, we're only talking about Area 1, which is Cape Cod Bay to the New Hampshire border. And of course, any Area 1 permit holders that fish in the adjacent federal zone. They're the only ones that would be affected by the minimum size going up. Yes, their counterparts in New Hampshire and Maine would not have that minimum size increase because they've already worked to repeal those. Well, Maine actually never enacted it. New Hampshire it did, so I believe they've gone in and repealed it. In addition, the Outer Cape Cod state-only fishermen that currently, that previously didn't have a maximum size, that then received a maximum size of 6 3/4 under Addendum 27, and then approved by us. And now that regulation was also repealed with the emergency action. That particular rule would be reinstated.
Okay, that's a good copy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other hands, Bradley, for discussion?
Bill Amaru has his hand up.
Excuse me?
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, I want to be absolutely clear, crystal clear, that I understand what you just said about the VNOTCH regulation not changing for the Outer Cape. You're telling me and the rest of the industry that the current method for determining a VNOTCH for the Outer Cape lobster management area will remain exactly the same if this vote is favorable. There will be no change in the way a VNOTCH is interpreted. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect.
Well, I think you just told Chris that there will be no change.
The emergency regulations, to go back to the, well, actually, yeah, you can keep it up here. The emergency regulations bill did not modify the VNOTCH definition. Therefore, the repeal of the emergency regulations would also have no effect. It's completely independent because the ASMFC, when they enacted Addendum 32 to repeal the gauge changes and the vent changes, did not take an action on the VNOTCH definition, then that which was approved in 27 remains, and that was put into regulation by us back in January and has been on the books with a July 1st effective date.
Right, I get it. Now, that is the interpretation. So it doesn't matter really where it comes from to me, or I think should anyone else. What matters is that it does change the interpretation of the VNOTCH. So I think it should be clear, because Chris's question was specific. Will it mean that the VNOTCH will be different for the Outer Cape lobster management area? And you said it would not. It doesn't matter to me that it was something that was
I said the rule would not change. Chris's question was, if the commission votes this up or down, what effect does it have on the VNOTCH possession standard for Outer Cape Cod? And my answer was none, because those rules are basically in the Code of Massachusetts regulations, and they weren't affected by the emergency. So we amended the VNOTCH possession rules on January it was January 3rd, those were published. So those have been on the books with a July 1st effective date. And that's not changing.
Well, I want it to be clear to everyone that the standard for determining a V-notch lobster before and after the date that this takes place will be different. I see that as, there's no question in my mind that that's what it is. That's what the lawsuit is about. And all the rest of it to me is just, I don't know, I want to call it gobbledygook, but boy, it's very confusing. But I know that on the rail of the boat, when a lobster is returned to the water because it's a V-notch, will be different after this goes into effect. And that's going to have an enormous impact on the Outer Cape management of lobsters and the fishing industry in this region.
Right, Bill, I'm going to try one more time. On January 3rd, the V-notch rule for Outer Cape cod was made uniform between the state and federal permit holders, 1/8 inch. After January 3rd, the ASMFC chose to repeal the vent size and gauge changes. Therefore, that uniform 1/8 inch minimum size, which allowed people until June 30th, if you're state-only permit holder, to take 1/4 inch V-notches, that's been allowed till June 30th. But the rules that were enacted in January say effective July 1st, it's an 1/8 inch, and those rules are going to be consistent for all the Outer Cape Cod permit holders, whether they have a state permit or a federal permit. So
Right.
so it's just coincidental that we're having this conversation today about repealing the emergency regs, but the V-notch rules were not part of an emergency reg. It was part of a regulation package you approved, or this commission approved back in the fall.
Are we good, Bill?
I'm not going to say anymore. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for the discussion. Any other hands, Bradley?
Tom O'Shea has his hand up.
Commissioner O'Shea, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I laid this out in my remarks, but I can see that this takes a lot of review. But let me be clear also, this vote is just, it has nothing to do with the V-notch possession limits for the Outer Cape Cod state-only permit holders, period. And I think if there's confusion about that, we've got to address that now. I'm still not clear if everybody's got that. So to Dan's point, yeah, it was approved already and it went into effect January 3rd because the commission already had voted on it for the Outer Cape. So this is a totally separate set of emergency regs to repeal what had been already in place, right? So I just want to make sure that's clear because I know that it is confusing and I can understand that there could be confusion. But Mr. Chair, I would ask that we make sure that our members understand this.
Yes, Tom, that's why we're having this discussion. So would anybody like to further discuss this V-notch issue with the director? Because looking at this slide in front of me, I don't see the V-notch mentioned. And in fact, the commission did back in the fall, as I recall, and Dan, you'd have to bring this up in minutes. They approved it for ASMFC. So,
Yeah,
right.
Ray, I think part of the confusion is that it's a matter of word choice. What we filed in January as a final regulation had enough on V-notch possession, as well as the gauge increases and the size increases, had an effective date of July 1st. So July 1st is today. So if we had done nothing, if the ASMC had done nothing, we had done nothing, then as of today, you would have had a new minimum size in Area 1. You would have a maximum size in the Outer Cape, state only, and you have this uniform V-notch standard for state and federal permit holders. But because the ASMFC pulled back on the vent and gauge changes, then we we proceeded to amend our rules, but only on the vent and gauge changes. So I think the confusion is that the fact that we have today is the effective date, but the rules were promulgated, codified back in January.
Thank you for the explanation, Dan. Questions to the director? Has everybody got an understanding of what the director just verbalized?
Suki has his hand up.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Just like to clarify, I voted against this whole thing back in the beginning because I knew Maine was not gonna implement this. Now we're hearing this mess right now because nothing would have been implemented today if we didn't take the vote before Maine threw the monkey wrench into it. We were having maybe a discussion about raising the V-notch on the Outer Cape. But because Massachusetts and the division rushed to implement this thing back when it first came out without Maine backing it and supporting it, here we are today in this mess that we have. That's all.
Well, so I disagree, because the way this transpired was the ASMFC approved the addendum, and then the states of Maine and New Hampshire went to the ASMFC and they created a replacement addendum to repeal certain aspects. And, you know, you're speculating that the entire board would have repealed everything in its entirety, but that's not how it transpired. The board did not choose to repeal the extra 10% trap tags, and the board did not choose to repeal the common V-notch standard for state and federal permit holders. Maybe they would have, but that's not it's not a reliable prediction. So I don't know how that would have gone.
Again, Ray, we went ahead of Maine and put all this in place. If we didn't have done that, we'd be sitting here today, maybe having a vote on the 800 trap tags, or the 880 trap tags, and the Outer Cape guys. But we rushed to implement the whole plan when nobody else was implementing it. That's all I'm saying, Dan, is that we always rush ahead of everybody, and Maine was well down the road of not going to be in support of this whole thing. And then it all fell apart because nobody would stand up to Maine. And here we are today doing what we're doing. That's all. That's all.
Thank you, Suki. Any other explanation for Suki, Dan?
No, sir.
Then can we move this to a roll call vote, at which time I will call the roll call? Bradley, being out, I have the names in front of me of people in attendance.
Sure, that works.
Thank you, Bradley. Bill Amaru,
No.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Suki, Sawyer,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
Eric Nelson.
Yes.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 in favor, 1 opposed. The motion passes. Your recommendation passes, Dan.
Thank you.
Moving on. Discussion items and updates. Interstate striped bass management and reconvening MFAC focus group.
Nicola?
Yep, that's me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bradley's gonna pull up a slide, but I just wanted to give the commission a quick update on some of the information that I presented last meeting relative to draft addendum 3 and the range of options that were being developed. At the time, we were working off some projections of the stock assessment that indicated the current measures had a 49% probability of rebuilding the stock by 2029, which is the rebuilding deadline for striped bass. And that there was just a 1% reduction needed to achieve a 50% probability of rebuilding in 2029 and a 7% reduction needed to achieve a 60% probability of rebuilding in 2029. And so at the ASMOC's last Striped Bass board meeting, they had decided to move the addendum forward with options to reduce removals by 7% to aim for that 60% probability of rebuilding. And that would, likely be what was approved for public comment when the board saw the next version of the draft addendum in August. So we're still working towards that August meeting where draft addendum 3 could be approved for public comment. But last month, the technical committee had another meeting and looked at some, once again, updated stock projections. And the difference here is that previously the projections that were being looked at included preliminary MRIP estimates for 2024. And those carry forward into, the assumptions that you make about what's going to happen in fishing mortality in 2025 and through 2029. And as is typical, a couple months later, the final estimates for the preceding year came out from MRIP, and those estimated that recreational fishery removals in 2024 for striped bass were 7% higher than what the preliminary estimates had shown. And when these are plugged into the projections, making the other same assumptions about recruitment and that F will increase a bit in 2025 and then go back down. These projections results that the technical committee did indicates that the current measures have a 30% chance of rebuilding the stock by 2029, and that a 12% reduction in removals would be necessary to have a 50% probability of rebuilding in 2029, and an 18% reduction would be needed to achieve that 60% probability. So this information has not formally been presented to the management board yet. This is just from a technical committee meeting last month, but it's my expectation that this will be presented to the board in August, and the board will, consider changing or revising the goals of draft addendum 3 if and when they determine to send it out for public comment to incorporate these new projections that call for higher reductions from the fishery. So I just wanted to provide that update from the information that I had presented last meeting, so you have some idea of what could be coming for striped bass. And I also wanted to update the commission on DMS plans to put together a commercial industry advisory panel for striped bass. This is something that we had let you know we were planning to do back in April when we made the determination not to proceed with a public hearing proposal on a maximum size limit. We decided not to act on that and advised the commission that we would seek to put together an industry advisory panel and also reconvene the MFAC's striped bass focus group to talk about the possible implications of draft addendum 3 and talk about, continue the discussions that we've already started about access and participation in this fishery, particularly if harvester-based tagging is required and draft in addendum 3. This would really force some discussions about the number of participants in the fishery and whether or not we can distribute and account for and collect tags back from 4,000 to 5,000 participants in the current striped bass fishery levels. So the plan is to get some invitations out hopefully this week to the industry advisory panel for a first meeting on July 31st. We'll be inviting the MFAC striped bass focus group members to attend that meeting and hear the discussion firsthand. And then I expect that we will likely have another subsequent meeting with just the focus group to kind of digest what we heard with the advisory panel and work on any proposals that we think ought to be brought forward to the full commission for consideration. So that's all. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Questions for Nicola?
Khalil has his hand up.
Khalil, you recognize. You might be muted, Khalil.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Bradley. And Nicola, just a question. The chart in front of me,
Mhm.
is this total bass population? Is this commercial, including recreational? And if so, or either one, are there any scenarios to gain the reductions that might be asked for? What might be some of the serious scenarios to be able to reach the goal?
So the far left column in the table are the recreational estimate of what the fishery removals for the recreational fishery were in 2024 from the MRIP survey, both the preliminary number and then the final estimate from 2024. And the other columns are the entire fishery are numbers for the entire fishery in terms of do the current measures that we have in place for the commercial and recreational fisheries, what is the probability that those measures will rebuild the stock in 2029, and what overall fishery reduction would be necessary to achieve either the 50 or 60% probability of rebuilding. So let's just take, for example, the 12% reduction to achieve a 50% probability. That would be needing to reduce the total fishery removals by 12%. There have been times where the decision has been made to apply that differently between the commercial and recreational fisheries to achieve the same overall reduction, but that would be a decision of the management board to make and something that would likely go out to public comment as part of draft addendum 3. And in terms of specific types of options to achieve a reduction in removals, I expect that the draft addendum would continue with options for a commercial quota reduction to achieve a certain percent reduction. And then on the recreational fishery, what's being looked at is seasonal closures that could be either no harvesting striped bass or no targeting striped bass, as well as some size limit changes. The board had previously decided that changes to the bag limit, which is already one fish, would not be part of any measures to try to reduce removals.
Thank you. It's exactly what I was asking. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Khalil. Any other hands, Bradley?
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this report. I would like to express an idea that I don't think is represented in these ideas about reducing mortality and the estimates, et cetera. It's based basically on conversations I've had with fishermen who are actively on the water and live in the area of Maryland and the Chesapeake watershed, where a lot of these fish come from or used to. And that has to do with this. I have a habit of going down to the landings a couple of times a week and talk to the local guys, mostly retired people that are fishing, and they're catching historically pretty good numbers of schoolie sized bass and bluefish in these areas close to shore from docks mostly. And without an exception, this year, the reports have been absolutely devastating in terms of the scarcity of young fish coming up into the estuaries. Then I have a conversation with one of the scallopers from Maryland who fishes out of my harbor, and he told me when we got onto the conversation about striped bass, he said, "Bill, people don't seem to know, who don't live down in our area, the major changes that are happening in the environment having to do with invasives. There's a catfish down there now called the blue cat. I'm sure that most people are familiar. it's a fish of more southern waters that is finding itself further and further north. He said that the size of the schools of these things and the size, the enormity that they grow to is remarkable. And they catch them in the winter mainly. It's a fishery that has a small market. And he said that when they dress them out, they see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fingerling-sized striped bass in their bellies. That's one additional sign of mortality or indicator of mortality. The other is the snakefish, which is another introduced species that's worked its way up into the estuaries, and they eat an enormous number of fish. They're a problem almost everywhere they have shown up, from the Everglades all the way up, and perhaps maybe approaching us eventually. So I was very happy to hear that there's a committee that's being formed of industry individuals as advisors. I hope that there'll be a lot more open-mindedness away from the fishery impacts that we're having on the resources, and encouraging the overall environmental impacts that are caused by these invasive species, as well as we know the temperature changes that are occurring. There's not much we can do about that. We can do something about invasives when it comes to catching more of them and maybe developing markets and subsidizing an effort to lower the numbers of invasives. So those are the comments that I'd like to make about it. And I'm distressed. I don't think anywhere near as much will be done if it's focused strictly on human impact and human take of these fish. Even if the fishery is shut down, I have the feeling that the striped bass resource is going to continue dwindling until it may not even appear as a recreational fishery at any level or commercial one. Anyway, it's yet to be determined, but I hope that there's an open mind and that these impacts from exterior sources other than human-induced fishing mortality are included in the overall prospect of rebuilding the stock. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bill. Bradley, hands.
Dan McKiernan.
Yeah,
Dan,
Nicola,
Director
for
McKiernan.
the sake of the commission, could you just define the word removals on the slide? Because it might be jargon that not everybody fully grasps.
Yes,
What
that,
goes into the estimate?
yep, that is the combination of recreational harvest plus the alive releases that are expected to die from that interaction. So it's removals plus dead discards, and dead discards are based on the 9% release mortality rate applied to the releases. And just in response to Bill, I just wanted to recognize that the benchmark stock assessment for striped bass that is coming up in 2027 will, be looking at the kind of the stock assessment holistically, and consideration of natural mortality and how that may be changing as well, over time, and is different at different ages. That'll all be part of what the stock assessment team reviews and considers in that process.
Thank you. That's encouraging, Nicolette. But if it's being done in the same way that it's been done in the past, it may miss the target, is all I'm saying. I think that there needs to be a considerable sea change in the approach of management for some of these resources that are heavily impacted in watersheds where spawning is very, very focused. And when you have large shifts in populations of predators, like we've seen with other marine mammals in our region, it has enormous impacts. So, but I know I'm not the only one who knows this. I just hope that they can make a major aspect of it down the road.
Thank you, Bill. Hands, Bradley.
Khalil.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Bradley. And I want to second what Bill Emery had to say regarding the invasive species, its effect upon the fry and the population. It's not, people want to put, a lot of blame on recreational anglers who keep their fish and commercial fishery quota. With a solid biomass, and with a quota system, the fish can reproduce, and they can They can do what they have to do to keep the population going. But it goes beyond just the invasive species. It goes beyond the climatic conditions that are occurring today in our world. And I don't think there's any argument about it, whether it's a cycle or whether it's man-made. When that water is warm, you have less oxygen in the water. That's affecting the fry. It's affecting the eggs. We have more siltation. What we had done back in the 70s and the 80s to curtail the fertilizers coming off the land. You know, as we know, 70% of the scrapers reproduce in the Chesapeake Bay area. The siltation that's occurring, all the abiotic factors which are affecting the eggs from the eggs are being laid. The spawning is taking place, but the threshold is not occurring because they're just not making it past the fry stage, if the eggs hatch at all. So it's really, I want to just second what Bill had to say. It's a combination of a lot of factors that go into this below level threshold, and we just can't put the blame on commercial fishermen. We can't put the blame on recreational fishermen who are keeping the fish. It's a very complicated issue, and somehow we have to untangle this bowl of spaghetti and find out where one end starts and the other end meets, and come to grips with it. But so I'm just, those are the concerns that I have regarding this fishery. We just can't blame any one factor. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Hands, Bradley?
I'm not seeing any other hands.
Question, Nicola. We are feeling pretty comfortable at one time at the commission on this 49% probability of current measures. And then more recently, when we finally got wave 6 in, so now we're looking at like 12% for 50% probability and 18%. And I know that this is all a preview as to what we're going to be seeing, most likely at this upcoming meeting in August. Any feel for what the reduction, what are we looking at? Like a 15% reduction as opposed to a 10% reduction? Any thoughts on that?
Just to be clear, that there were projections prior to these ones that are on the board, Ray, that were only, MRIP data for 2024 that were like waves 1 through 4 and then waves 1
Right.
through 5. So what the projections that were for the 49% probability of rebuilding, those were full year 2024 MRIP data. They were just the preliminary estimates.
Okay.
MRIP does preliminary estimates, and then a couple months later they release final estimates for the prior year that incorporate more VTR data from charter boats and head boats, and will often have more effort records from the FES survey. So there was just a couple states that, when that additional effort data was plugged in, it increased the estimates for those states and led to the change that is in this table and what those removals estimates were. But previously, when the board had the other estimates, they decided they would have one set of options that looked at a 7% reduction to achieve the 60% probability of rebuilding. I think now that the board will be presented with these updates that shows, a reduction is needed for a 50% probability and more for the 60% probability. Maybe there'll end up being two sets of options for both the 50% probability and the 60% probability. But again, it'll be up to the board in August to decide how to move forward with these new projections.
Yes, thank you. So I might recall whether it was the TC meeting or the PDT meeting where they didn't like a 7% reduction. They would rather have had, move it to a 10% reduction, because they said a 7% reduction is very difficult to manage within the scheme. So I was just, picking your brain a little. Yeah, thank you.
Right. The TC had made some comments that, anything less than a 10% reduction, it's very difficult to evaluate the effectiveness of those measures that you would implement to achieve less than a 10% reduction just because of the natural, and the inherent variability and catch. So they had just, cautioned about, being able to evaluate the effectiveness of the measures if it was less than a 10% reduction.
Thank you, Nicola. I certainly appreciate you sitting at the table, shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the Mass delegation when it comes to striped bass. Thank you. Any other questions for Nicola on striped bass?
Khalil, not sure if that's a new hand.
Khalil, have you got your hand up again?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Bradley. And no one does it better than Nicola and has a handle on it than she does. But I just, it's a comment, editorialization. If it continues, we can have, the reason we're doing the reductions is to conserve what we have left in the population. And gut reaction as to what the future looks like, unless there's a miraculous change in the climatic conditions, I'm going to say abiotic conditions in the Chesapeake. And now for the first time, we're showing trouble threshold issues in the Hudson, where 30% of our stripers come from. My gut reaction is that, and I understand why we're having the reductions, and people don't like the reductions, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to conserve the population that we have now. And no one's saying we shouldn't take striped bass for the table or whatever, because that's what we do. And unless we can get a grip on what's happening in the Chesapeake environmentally and in the Hudson, we're going to try to, the savior of the fisheries is going to be through the reductions. And I guess Nicola, no one does it better than Nicola, and she has a handle on it. But unless the threshold, we get a year, 2 years, or 3 years of above level threshold, I think it looks pretty dismal for striped bass. So Nicola, thanks for everything you're doing.
You're welcome, and thank you for your kind words. I would note that these projections are based on, recruitment from the last 15 to 20 years. And so I expect that there'll be another set of projections, kind of the sensitivity runs shown in August that pull recruitment just from the last 6 years. That's been, defined as recruitment failure from the Chesapeake Bay, and it will be a more pessimistic look if recruitment is similar to just the past 5-6 years. And that, I think that if this is kind of a regime shift in recruitment and what the Chesapeake Bay is able to produce, that's one reason that the benchmark stock assessment will also be looking at the biological reference points and whether the current reference points are still appropriate and possibly, some revisions to them.
Yes, and thank you. And also, as we know, the population has moved north into the Canadian provinces, the Atlantic coast, and it's creating their own industry and regulatory processes up there. And I guess that's the nature of the beast. Animals adapt to the situations which are best suited for their reproduction and food source, et cetera. So we're seeing a major change, and I'm coming off the commission, and August is my last meeting, and I'll be, looking forward to, finding out how things progress regarding ASMFC and recommendations in the future. But thanks again, Nicola. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Khalil. And Nicola, if I could ask about this reconvening the Marine Fish Advisory Commission focus group. I believe, I could be mistaken, Bill Doyle, Khalil, myself, and is there a fourth member from the commission? Because Khalil is coming off the commission in August. So is this the proper time to call on members to volunteer to come on to this focus group? To volunteer for it?
Dan, do you want to address that?
We were going to include Eric Nelson, given his involvement with the commercial striped bass fishery. And of course, we can't have more than a quorum, which would be 5. So we were going to invite Eric to join it. So Nicola, remind me, we've got Doyle, Ray, Khalil, and then Eric.
Yes, other than Khalil is coming off,
Right.
so.
So you would be looking for a 4th member to come on?
If there's interest in the, somebody wants to do this. So let me just say this, that I'm sensitive about the creation of this like extra panel. So in the past couple of directors ago, we farmed out these discussions to a group that didn't include the commission. So what I want to do is, of course, have a conversation with industry members, have the commission subcommittee, focus group members present, and then take it back to the focus group, and then have the focus group take it to the full commission and me. I'm walking a fine line here between having like an industry advisory panel, but at the same time, I want to make sure that this commission knows that their input is like premier over just folks that we invite in. So to answer your question, Ray, we'll have 3. If someone wants to fill that 4th seat, that'll be fine. We just can't have 5.
Thank you, Dan. Anything else on your agenda, Nicola? Or any more questions for Nicola?
I have a hand from Eric Nelson.
Eric, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you. If asked, I'd be happy to be a member of the striped bass focus group. I've been fishing for stripers for, I guess, some 60 years now. As we mentioned, I'm an active charter captain now, and I fish commercially for stripers, and have witnessed a lot of changes to the striper population over the years. And I agree with what Khalil said and others said. It's a very complex issue, and I'm sure the environmental factors have a major part in what's happening. But anyway, I would be happy to be part of the discussion going forward.
Thank you, Eric. Questions for Nicola? Or have you got anything else you want to discuss, Nicola?
No, I think we can save it for the upcoming meetings.
Okay, we'll save it then. Thank you very much for your presentation on striped bass. Let's take a 5-minute biological break. Be back at 11:37, please. Well, once again, we're reconvening this meeting, and we're going to move on to federal fisheries management. And I presume Melanie's going to present.
I'm here, Chair.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So last week was the June meeting of the New England Fishery Management Council. I thought I would highlight, aside from the management plan specific actions, I thought I'd update you on a few overarching issues that are coloring the landscape of regional fisheries management right now. A lot of this is dynamic. It's not fully resolved, so it makes for pretty uncertain ground for the regional councils, for NIMS, the science centers, and of course for fishermen trying to operate in this environment. Bradley, do you have the slideshow I gave you?
Yes, sorry, I'm having a technical difficulty, but I'm
No
getting my
worries. There's
screen
nothing
shared
too
now.
exciting on them.
Bear with me for just a minute.
I can, I'll just start with some of the federal operational updates because there's nothing really to see on those slides. So in terms of the budget, the council's budget, that's planned out for the calendar year. So that's through December 2025, but the funding is administered on the federal fiscal year. So that's ending in September. And as of last week, the council was not fully funded for 2025. So the fiscal planning at the council right now is really focused. You can go to the next slide, Bradley. There we go. So it's really focused not on whether the council is going to have to take cuts, but how much those cuts will be. There are some plans in place for what steps the council would take. I think some of the low-hanging fruit is obviously moving to more virtual meetings and not providing the states with a bonus technical assistance grant that we've gotten in the past. With a new assistant administrator, Eugenio Pinheiro Soler, there's a real focus. The primary focus at the agency is meeting the requirements and objectives of the recent executive orders, and there's quite a few. So it's certainly juggling a bunch of balls in the air, trying to keep track of all these. I'll just quickly note there's Executive Order 14276. That's that restoring American seafood competitiveness. So the main thing there for the councils is IDing regulations, deregulations, and that we have until the end of September to do that. There'll be a comment period through the federal agency for that, and the Secretary of Commerce is going to be publishing a list of most heavily regulated fisheries. I don't think I've seen that published yet. There's also Executive Order 14192. That's called Unleashing Prosperity Through Deregulation. That's the one that really guides agencies with repealing at least 10 regulations for every new regulatory action. Executive Order 14154, Unleashing American Energy. I mentioned that just because it really directs all the agencies to remove impediments in terms of development of energy and natural resources, and that can affect review times and permitting. Executive Order 14172, that was the one that was the Gulf of America. And then the final one I want to note is Executive Order 14303, Restoring Gold Standard Science. This establishes 9 scientific integrity principles from reproducibility to transparency. In terms of transparency, it appears they're mandating access to models and source code, which I think is a good thing. There's some recent guidance to the agencies from the Federal Office of Science and Technology Policy. I did request at the council meeting for an update at the NRCC, the Northeast Regional Coordinating Council. At their next meeting, they have an intersessional at August 20th so that we can get a little more insight on how the agencies are handling that and if how it'll affect any of the science flowing into the councils. Meanwhile, Dr. Hare at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center noted that they have reverted to their 2021 policy. I don't really have details, but certainly can talk more about those offline. There's 2 petitions of note that I want to mention. These are requests made directly to the Secretary of Commerce for rulemaking. The Fisheries Survival Fund has requested the Secretary through the National Marine Fisheries Service to order the council to create a rotational limited access scallop area within the closed area 2 habitat closure area. This is that area known as Northern Edge on the Georges Bank. The council had discontinued work on an amendment to do just that last September, partly due to conflicts with habitat, groundfish, and lobster management objectives. The other petition is from Intershell, which is requesting the Secretary eliminate a prohibition on surf clam and mussel dredging in the Great South Channel Habitat Management Area. Again, previous action by the council, this was omnibus habitat amendment that created the habitat management area. And then there was a follow-on framework that provided regulated access for the surf clam fishery to less complex habitat, as well as the opportunity to conduct research to potentially inform future access to other areas. I know that one area of particular interest is that Rosencrown. So the council's not going to, get ahead of itself with these petitions. We're really waiting to see what comes out of the administration on these. I'll note that the Northern Edge scallop petition did receive some amplification through support from the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy. And then the last thing I want to note in terms of the federal operational updates are the assessments, the schedule and the timeline. So there's been a recent revision to the 2025 schedule by the Northeast Region Coordinating Council, obviously in response to cuts in resources. So the assessment schedule for management track, Badly, next slide. I think I have these listed actually. So this table shows all the planned 2025 management track assessments, and those in yellow are what's changed. Those will now only undergo a data update. As you can see, the adjustments really only affect New England Council managed species, one monkfish being jointly managed with the MID. Next slide. The big change is with the research track assessment schedule. You can see here all in red, basically everything was paused except for longfish, squid, and striped bass. So beyond 2025, the schedule is no longer determined. It had been scheduled out to 2028, including a research track on projections. So this intersessional meeting on August 20th of the NRCC will be meeting to discuss the future assessment schedule. Next slide. And then in terms of more council-specific operational updates, the council is undergoing a holistic strategic plan. This isn't to be confused with the scallop strategic plan effort that just was underway. This holistic effort is really focused on challenges associated with management uncertainty and ecosystem changes. So it's going to be working really hand in glove with the new Climate and Ecosystem Committee that John Papalardo chairs. The council has contracted with an outside group, the Parnan Group, and they're going to document existing approaches and processes. They're going to identify key drivers for successful and unsuccessful approaches, and then finally develop a holistic strategic plan to guide the council towards more resilient and responsive fisheries management, given the uncertainty that we're living under in terms of the ecosystem. The plan is due to be approved by the council in April of next year. So a little while now, they just began doing some interviews with folks. Omnibus flexibility. This is actually before the council is submitting any of its deregulation items on September 30th in response to the executive order. It has already altered its 2025 management priorities to undertake this omnibus management flexibility action. Unfortunately, it means pausing work on Herring Amendment 10. Instead, the council will focus on how to increase flexibility in management and regulatory processes, again, given the changes in federal agency staffing. Sorry, excuse me, I had a little hiccup there. The council initiated this last week, and staff are developing alternatives to more consistently address specification frequencies, rollovers and defaults, the use of in-season adjustments, and the use of the specification setting process versus framework, and to have that be a consistent option across all FMPs. So this is really about introducing things that may exist for one or two FMPs, but having those flexible management options available for all of them. This is pretty fast track. The council is scheduled to take final action in December. Risk policy is something that the council is continuing to work through phased implementation. We adopted the new risk policy, so now we're really seeing how to integrate it. A reminder that this involves scoring and weighting of several factors to arrive at both quantitative and qualitative risk advice for council decisions. This can include the ABC setting. There's no action in June, but this really is an overarching change that continues to be refined by the council. So there's a lot of opportunity for input. There is some simulation testing work that's being undertaken by UMaine this summer, and that will all be coordinated with a bunch of IRA projects, IRA funded projects, the Inflation Reduction Act projects. So a lot of moving parts, but hopefully some clarity and improved management approaches and outcomes in the future. And then the last two things I wanted to mention here, I thought were pretty positive outcomes. That's the socioeconomics bullet, and then the industry-based survey that's under discussion with the NTAP. So in terms of the socioeconomics, the council's Science and Statistical Committee, the SSC, has formed a social science subgroup, and they've really done some great work to lay out a roadmap for better utilizing socioeconomic information in management decision making. Some of the things I pulled out, getting input at the assessment phase, not just afterwards, proactively engaging with and tracking all the research that's out there. The group is going to meet periodically, I think twice a year is the schedule right now, and they're going to provide advice and recommendations to the council. So they'll definitely be involved with that risk policy work as it continues. I think a really great development there. And then the NTAP IBS progress, it does sound like this is continuing to advance. This is an industry-based survey that right now is in a pilot phase to see, how much and what types of survey data can be collected on a commercial vessel in and around the southern New England wind energy area, as well as understanding survey trawl gear performance across different depths. So NIMS has secured funding for 6 sea days. The outcome of this first phase will inform a second phase, which would expand to multiple vessels and would have a larger spatial and temporal footprint. Ultimately, this is hoping to inform a coast-wide industry-based survey that follows the spatial and temporal footprint of the federal survey, is an additional data input to stock assessments, and it, if need be, could even be considered a potential replacement of the federal survey in the future. Next slide. So thanks for bearing with me on the operational updates. There's a lot going on, but now I'll get into the fishery management plan specific actions that happened. The big decision last week for groundfish was how to proceed after the Secretary's rejection of Amendment 25 and Framework 69. That was rejected on process grounds. So Amendment 25, as a reminder, was meant to be the administrative vehicle for updating from 2 to 4 cod stocks, with subsequent management provisions like the status determination criteria and catch limits established in Framework 69. So despite a year of meetings, advice on utilizing this 2-step process, it was deemed lacking and requiring of either a secretarial action or a council action to repackage the management revisions into one amendment. I've highlighted here in bold, this is the letter that the council received from Regional Administrator Petney. Again, it's highlighting that we've been told this is a process issue. Basically, we need to take what was in Framework 69 and package it into Amendment 25. So last week, the council did vote to retain its role and to work to resubmit Amendment 25 with all the necessary provisions. There will be no substantive changes. We've had to set aside all our other groundfish priorities other than Framework 72. That's the action to establish the next year's specifications, so 2026 to 2028. This means that we will be setting aside work on redfish exemption, Amendment 23 review, and work on revising groundfish ABC, acceptable biological catch control rules, until this is submitted. So we are scheduled to take final action on a repackaged Amendment 25 in September. Next slide. Scallops. We're gearing up for the next set of specifications for 2026 and 2027 default measures, which means that the surveys are underway and updated scientific advice will go to the SSC for its deliberations on catch limits. This year, the scallop assessment underwent a research track, which, unlike most research tracks, actually resulted in management advice. Normally, you would only get that after a management track following a research track. There were several areas where the peer review panel felt they were kind of going off more faith than actual documented work, which led to several partially met terms of reference. And as a manager, I would say the most consequential decision, in my opinion, was the panel's acceptance, yet cautioning, on the use of a combined single reference point for the entire scallop stock. So without getting into the weeds, the various models spit out regional reference points that you can see here on this slide for the Mid-Atlantic and Georges Bank separately. These are then combined into a single reference point. So you can see the combined FMSY of 0.49 comes from a Georges Bank specific FMSY 0.36, and then a pretty unbelievable Mid-Atlantic FMSY of 1.56. And the appropriateness of that combined reference point is in question, and it led the peer review panel to conclude, and quote, the different modeling regions appear to be experiencing substantially different environmental conditions, different rates and temporal patterns of natural mortality, growth, and recent patterns of exploitation. Thus, it seems to the review panel that reference points are region-specific and that combining them, although done so in a mathematically correct way, introduces additional and unquantified risk. So this leaves the management side of things in a bit of a quandary. The council's plan development team will be working on a method that takes into account these regional differences that they will then provide to the SSC when they are undertaking their deliberations. I believe the SSC meets in August to discuss the research track findings, but won't develop actual catch limits until a little later this year in October. You can see this on the slide that was part of Dr. Hare's presentation to the council on the research track, that the explanation in terms of the Mid-Atlantic, it's not well defined. So it's that red curve there, and unlike the blue curve, there's not much change in it. So that's part of the problem. You just can't really figure out where to put the FMSY. I will note, given the reduced resources and timelines, it's likely that the scallop action to establish specifications for 2026 won't be a framework. We did initiate framework 40, but it's likely to be downgraded to a specification package to keep it moving quickly, have measures in place by the start of the scallop fishing year. So that means that we just can't add any management measures other than the specs to this to keep it a spec package. And then just a quick note that I'm sure most people have heard by now, the Federal Optical Survey, HABCAM, completed 21% of its planned tows when it encountered a shipwreck. As of the council meeting, recovery efforts were still underway. And to me, it really means the end of the Federal Optical Survey for this year, just given the closing window. There are other research set-aside survey partners that are operating optical and dredge surveys across the scallop stock footprint this year, so it's not the end of the world. And the federal dredge survey remains underway, along with some piloting that they're doing with AUV survey work. I'll just briefly mention, I don't have a slide because I wasn't sure if Nick was going to mention it or not, spiny dogfish. That was something where the council last week initiated a framework consistent with the MIDS actions. I'll mention that Tony Kearns, who was there on behalf of ASMSC, did flag a little bit of a snag in terms of working through an issue where the federal quota might be less than the interstate quota because of ASMSC rollover that will happen this year, which could create a problem in terms of the federal quota shutting down before the interstate quota is fully taken. I think that's something obviously that will be discussed at ASMSC, but just the action is moving along at the Mid and New England. Next slide. Although here's another one that's got a little bit of a red flag for ASMSC to deal with, the omnibus gear marking framework. So this is the council-specific action to allow alternate surface marking provisions for on-demand fixed gear. It's not about anything other than just the marking and what needs to happen kind of administratively at the council side. There are options for areas and times that I've listed here. You can allow in all federal waters within the greater Atlantic region, allow just during and within the seasonal restricted areas, or allow within the seasonal restricted areas, but at any time. So some of the issues that came up during the council discussion was that mobile gear is going to have to invest. I mean, every mobile gear fisherman is going to have to invest in gear to track track on-demand fixed gear. And so, that starts to speak to maybe restricting where and when, maybe that 1C. No final decision is needed right now. There's an educational component in terms of requiring, maybe requiring. The other issue that came up was NIMS is looking to authorize this by issuing letters of authorization. Now, those obviously can only be issued to federal permit holders by NIMS, but these closures go right to the beach and include state waters in many cases. So, that definitely can present a complexity, or it's really burdening the states with, are we going to now be issuing LOAs? I think it's probably more of an issue for Maine with the number of state-only permit holders they have, but something that we'll need to pay attention to as a state. And then obviously there's been a bit of a process input issue. We don't manage at the council lobster fishermen. This isn't really about regulating lobster fishermen. It's about allowing for the gear, but there's been some real dissatisfaction with relying on the council process to have any kind of engagement with a lobster fisherman. Obviously, that's not the norm for them. So some frustration there. And then I'll just note that as of right now, the ASMC Lobster Board meeting, I think, overlaps with the TRT meeting, which is not great. Hopefully that'll change. So lots to come on that. I expect Dan, obviously, we'll have lots of discussion at ASMC on that, but that's how it's proceeding at the council level. Next slide. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. So this is it. In terms of upcoming final actions, you can see here what's slated for the September meeting and the December meeting. September will have, it starts the new council year, so we'll have the election of officers. We've got monkfish specs, skate specs. Hopefully we'll wrap up that repackaging of Amendment 25, the management flexibility omnibus. We'll be dealing with that on-demand gear marking omnibus that I just summarized. And then we'll be providing our list of deregulations. And then December, our specs for groundfish, specs for scallops, dogfish specs, the revised EFH, essential fish habitat, and then we'll finalize our next year's council management priorities. And that's a wrap from me, Chair.
Thank you, Melanie, for a very comprehensive presentation. Questions for Melanie?
Khalil has his hand raised.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Bradley. Again, Melanie, you always do such a great job, so thorough. Question about the budget. You have a budget cut. Besides a reduction in in-person meetings, what other what other items or departments or functions will be as a result of these budget cuts? So how will they be affected?
Yeah, I don't want to get in front of Executive Director O'Keefe on that. I'd be happy to talk offline or give you a little more insight, but certainly we're going to be moving to more virtual meetings right now. But there are other provisions that she's looking at, but I'm not going to speak for her.
Okay. I mean, I obviously something has to give when you're having a budget. Do you have any idea what percent of your budget that you're operating now is going to be cut?
No, that's the thing. We're still not fully funded for the council's not fully funded for 2025. And fully expecting that 2026 will be cuts too at this point.
Who's creating these cuts?
Well, that would be Congress in the budget bill. Right now, it's the continuing resolution, which is the reason that 2025 is still uncertain. I think part of the reason why 2025 is still uncertain, despite the continuing resolution, is if you looked at the continuing resolution that was passed in March, I think it takes just half a page to lay out the budget for the Department of Commerce and the Department of Justice. So there's just a line item that says Department of Commerce. So it's not clear, it used to be much more specific. You would have a line item for the council. So I think that's kind of bogging it down a little bit, given all the uncertainties about future funding too.
Okay. Very action is a reaction. I just hope it doesn't affect the great work that's coming out of the council.
Well, I mean, so in terms of how it's already affected, right, we're having to be very restricted on our priorities. We're really battening down the hatches in terms of we can do like the mandatory and the IRA, and that's it. So that really means doing like specifications, and we can't undertake some of that more proactive, thoughtful management that we always want to do, and that fishermen are looking to us to do in terms of making better opportunities.
Okay. Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Khalil. Questions for Melanie?
I'm not seeing any other hands.
Thank you, Bradley.
Ooh, free pass. Thanks, guys.
Thank, thank you very much, Melanie. You have a good 4th of July weekend.
You
Moving
too.
on, offshore wind energy. I don't know who you've got presenting on this, Dan, so.
Yeah, Brad Schondelmeyer. Brad
Brad.
was assigned to this position back in the winter, and he's been very busy representing the agency on many fronts regarding offshore wind.
Thank you. Brad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to try to share some slides here. And apologies to those who have seen this already. I will be not presenting this again, so enjoy it while you can. So thank you for having me today. I'm going to get rid of some more things blocking my way here. I'll be briefing you on a recent study tour that I was grateful to be included on. But first, a bit of background. I know many of you are familiar with the status and technology of fixed offshore wind, which is currently being built in southern New England and mid-Atlantic waters. Last year, there was a commercial lease awarded for floating offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine with a build-out timeline of about 10 plus years. With that lead time, many acknowledge that learning from the experiences of others is key to understanding the issues and identifying the roles that fishermen, developers, and managers can play in order to create a responsible development process. So the study tour itself, let's go here, was the product of Maine Department of Marine Resources, the governor and their governor's energy office, who worked with a private donor to design a one-week study tour for Gulf of Maine fishermen and marine resource managers to learn about floating offshore wind from the Scottish government, developers, and fishing industry. The objectives of this tour were to establish a common understanding of floating offshore wind technologies, understanding the status of floating offshore wind in Scotland, including their planning, policy, science, and research, and also engaging with their fishing industry. Learning about Kincardine floating offshore wind project, focusing on the technology's design and installation of that specific wind farm, and then exchanging best practices for assessing and mitigating the impacts of floating offshore wind development on fishing industry and wider coastal communities. As context, the current state of floating offshore wind in the US, University of Maine has deployed a quarter-scale offshore wind turbine up in Penobscot Bay off of Castine. They'll be connecting it to the grid this month and monitoring it for the next 18 months. The state of Maine also has a research array, which may house up to 12 turbines in the future. They're continuing to explore their research questions currently and beginning a trawl survey this month as well. Avangrid Renewables was awarded 2 lease areas, as seen in purple there. They've created websites where you can view their communications plans, both tribal, federal, and fisheries. And then Invenergy also has 2 leases that were awarded last year, and they're currently working on their communications plans. So in comparison, hopping across the pond, we see that Scotland has about 9 offshore wind farms in total in operation, seen in red there, which are generating up to 3,800 megawatts of power. 2 of those farms that you see circled in red are floating offshore wind farms that are generating up to 78 megawatts of power, which is roughly enough to power 50 to 60,000 homes. One of which of those farms is Kincardine offshore wind farm, the one to the south, which we were able to visit in person during our trip. These projects listed on the left that are not in red are in the pipeline and could create up to 45,000 megawatts if all developed, which is somewhat unlikely. In the past few years, the UK Crown Estate held 2 leasing rounds for floating offshore wind specifically, called ScotWind and Intog. Scotland and the UK have fully embraced offshore wind and more recently floating offshore wind, and seek to be leaders in the development over the next few decades. Worldwide, there's currently about 277 megawatts of floating offshore wind capacity, with most of that coming from Norway and the UK. In the next 5 to 10 years, the UK, China, Taiwan, South Korea, and Italy are predicted to generate the most growth in the floating offshore wind sector, with over 14,000 megawatts announced by 2029. Now moving on to a little bit of the technology and engineering around floating offshore wind. When offshore wind is sited in waters deeper than 40 meters, fixed foundation aren't feasible and floating structures become necessary. Floating offshore wind is made up of a few general structural designs, including foundation types, mooring types, and dynamic cable arrangements. Floating foundations being used today include semi-submersible, spar foundations, tension leg platforms, and also barges. They each have their pros and cons in different habitats and can be built in different types of ports. In addition, we have different mooring types. We have catenary moorings, which have long scopes. We have semi-taut moorings that have similarly longer scopes, but also weights at the edges of the lines to keep them anchored closer to the bottom. And then we have taut moorings that have a smaller footprint and can be used only with certain types of platforms. In addition, we have different types of cable arrangements. When the turbines are daisy chained together, sometimes that electric cable is in the water column, is suspended. Other times it can be buried partially between turbines, and sometimes, which is more preferable for fishing, it can be buried completely between turbines, and the burial would start inside the footprint of the mooring cables. So all of these factors and how they are designed lead to floating offshore wind farms that may or may not create opportunities for commercial or recreational fishing, in addition to other biological and oceanographic concerns. Moving on to the tour itself and the group who traveled. The group was made up of 10 fishing industry members, including Jackie Odell and Eric Hess from Massachusetts, myself, and 3 other resource managers from Maine Department of Marine Resources and Governor's Energy Office. The state of Maine, Laura Singer, and Caroline and Jade from Carbon Trust did all the planning so we could have great accommodations, travel, and eat well, and focus on the engaging discussions and amazing amount of information that was presented to us. In addition to Caroline and Laura's facilitation, we received presentations from Mike, Mary, and Allie from Carbon Trust, Caroline and Kirsty from the Scottish Government, Dr. Laura Beth Jordan at University of Edinburgh's FlowWave test tank, Finn, Cameron, Ian, and Michael who are fisheries managers with various offshore wind developers, and then met with Peter Duncan, gave us a tour of Peterhead Port, and Elspeth MacDonald, the CEO of Scottish Fishermen's Federation, and her staff gave us a very informative presentation in Aberdeen. Our trip was 1 week, and it started with 2 days in the lovely Edinburgh, where we met with, once again, the Scottish Government, Carbon Trust staff, and visited FlowWave, which is really impressive. Most technologically advanced flow test tank in the world. They wouldn't let us take pictures inside. I recommend looking it up online. Pretty impressive. They were getting ready to test a prototype offshore wind foundation as we were leaving. We then took the train up the coast to Aberdeen for 3 days, where we met with the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, got a great tour of Peterhead, the largest whitefish port in the UK, saw the morning auction, looked at a bunch of their vessel infrastructure, really impressive operation. And then finally, our trip out to Kincardine floating offshore wind farm. We then made our way back to Edinburgh for a final day of debriefings before flying home. With all the informative discussions and experiences we had, the star of the show was undoubtedly our visit to Kincardine offshore wind farm. A bit about the wind farm itself. It is currently consists of 5 Vestas V164 turbines that generate up to 9.5 megawatts of power. When it was fully commissioned in 2021, it was the largest floating offshore wind array in the world until 2023, when Norway commissioned a offshore wind farm, a floating offshore wind farm, I must say. It's located a little over 9 miles from shore in about 260 feet of water. It was constructed in 2 phases. Initially, it was just a 2 megawatt turbine that was assembled in Scotland and was generating power in late 2018. Then in 2020 and 2021, 5 wind float semi-submersible foundations were built in Ferrol, Spain, towed on a barge 800 nautical miles up to Rotterdam, Netherlands, where the tower, nacelle, and blades were attached. Then towed, fully assembled, another 400 nautical miles to the wind farm site off of Aberdeen, Scotland. While the engineering and scale is certainly impressive, the efficiency of this construction is debatable. And here are some of the hundreds of pictures that were taken by the group. We got a typical North Sea day with 20 to 25 knot north winds, 6 to 8 foot seas, and many of us now have a newfound appreciation for the stability of catamaran style boats. They're actually pretty common out there. I'll discuss more and take questions if you have any, but we were all lucky to be able to join this trip and struck by the indescribable scale of the turbines and how stable they were, seemingly unmoving despite the large currents. Khalil, I see your hand. I'll probably just take questions right at the end there, but thank you. After our trip to the wind farm, and again, after our return to Edinburgh, we debriefed, shared our takeaways from the site trip and visit, and the different perspectives of the group allowed for great discussions, and these takeaways that I'll cover here reflect many but not all things we learned. So in our discussions with the Scottish government, we learned that since the Scottish government devolved from the UK, their jurisdictions and government are relatively new. They don't have a BSE, or the Bureau of Safety and Energy or Environmental Enforcement in Scotland, with which to hold the developers accountable for any mistakes or safety issues. They only have their permitting structures. The government's guidance for fisheries mitigation and environmental impacts was pretty limited, but they are working with groups like ScotMer, different working groups, and their liaisons to improve the engagement, both for fisheries mitigation and deconfliction of development and fishing. Talking to the developers, we also heard about a lack of guidance or engagement on financial mitigation, which created a disjointed, inequitable process between the developers and fishermen when it came to financial mitigation. The developers were concerned with the lack of engagement from the government in helping wind and fisheries coexist. There was a stated lack of data, both fishing and environmental, and then shoreside infrastructure, grid connections, transmission suitability, continue to be problems for them, in addition to port infrastructure. Speaking with the commercial fishermen of both the Scottish Fishermen's Federation and Peterhead Port Authority, they stated a concern with the lack of monitoring and government proactive engagement and guidance. Once again, main theme here. Over time, the fishing industry had learned to work with and around the oil and gas industry, which has been there since the 70s and 80s. And oil and gas typically has a smaller spatial footprint. The Scottish fishing industry was feeling a spatial squeeze, both by regulations, marine protected areas, and now offshore development of offshore wind. And then fishermen in general in Scotland sounded like they were pretty frustrated over the lack of a public understanding of the importance of their industry, both economically and with food production. From our visit to the Kincardine offshore wind farm, we've felt that it was almost an entirely different sector than fixed offshore wind because of its scale, construction properties, and that it requires completely different infrastructure and vessels. The scale of Kincardine offshore wind farm versus what we would expect in the Gulf of Maine was pretty different, 5 versus over 100 turbines, and then the distance from shore. So making that visualization of the Gulf of Maine array is a little difficult. As I mentioned, it was a North Sea day out, the currents were running, seas were up, but not much noticeable movement of the turbines themselves. And then ultimately, we all came away with an impression of how impressive these structures were and the engineering behind them. But one thing we would have liked to see more of was the subsea infrastructure, mooring lines, cables, and I think that's the main driver behind the fishability of these turbines in the future. And final takeaways, we all felt that the UK's decarbonization goals have broad public buy-in and are driving offshore wind efforts. The success and the viability of floating offshore wind is very dependent on port and shipping infrastructure, both in Scotland and in future worldwide efforts. The grid connection, shoreside infrastructure, and development costs continue to be problems for their industry. Scottish fishing industry, once again, continues to have concerns with environmental impacts and lack of monitoring and spatial conflicts related to offshore wind. Both the fishermen and the developers desired more oversight and guidance from the UK and the Scottish government. And some felt in the group, that our Gulf of Maine lease siting process, which included state and federal involvement, was better than what we heard about in the North Sea. And then finally, this UK study tour, the experiences, it gave us experiences that created experts within the group who can now go lead productive discussions and engage with developers in early stages of the Gulf of Maine floating offshore wind development. And we all felt there was an incredible value in this trip itself. I would like to thank Maine DMR, Maine GEO for coming up with this trip, Carbon Trust, Laura Singer for coordinating it, our UK hosts for the time and effort they put into their presentations, and then Mass DMF, EEA, and Clean Energy Center for getting me on board. And with that, I think it's time for some questions.
Questions for Brad from commission members. Khalil, you had your hand up?
Yes, I did, Mr. Chair.
You're recognized.
Brad, that was an incredible presentation. It was excellent. And what I would suggest is that maybe 2 years ago, we received a very comprehensive memo through the governor's office, and I think through the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. I believe that's what it came from. It was about 16, 17 pages of talking about all the conditions that have to be met to meet the environmental standards to put those floating turbines into the Gulf of Maine. And if somehow that memo could be resurfaced, especially for some of the new members of the commission, MFAC that is, I think that would be awesome. I don't have it at my hand directly, but I know I have it somewhere. But are you familiar with that memo that came out, Brad?
I am not, but I will dig it up for you and get it back to the commission here.
Yeah, I think Dan, do you remember that memo that went out?
Actually, Khalil, I'm trying to rack my brain to remember it, but I'll consult Jared to go through some of the old commission meeting files.
It was really comprehensive. It even talked about the chains that it would be holding the anchor into place and how that couldn't give off any galvanic responses so that it wouldn't affect the fish. I mean, it was very comprehensive, very complete, and if that could be resurfaced and sent back to the commission members, I think that would be worth it, because this is a very controversial. Wind power is very controversial, but it takes from cradle to grave. It takes a lot of thought and a lot of energy and a lot of background to even begin the building of these things. So I think it would be worthwhile having that memo redistributed again.
Yeah, I'll take a look at into that and get it distributed. If you bring up the topic of scour and chains and mooring design, those are some of the specific things I think that if it was at the request of this commission, that the Fisheries Working Group on offshore wind could look into. We've had discussions between DMF and CZM specifically about scour around anchors and moorings and floating offshore wind and what that might do for fisheries habitat. So I think we're all on the same page here.
Hey, and Brad, one last question. This is an important one. Which single malt did you like the best in Scotland?
I stuck to the Guinness. We had a lot of early mornings.
I'm joking. Yeah. Great report. Thanks.
Thank you. And while I have the stage here, can I mention 2 or 3 more things related to offshore wind?
By all means, Brad, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't have slides ready to go, but we on Friday were given approval from the governor's office that our Massachusetts Fisheries Innovation Fund, which is our $1.75 million fund, initially from Vineyard Wind. The RFP for solicitation number 1 was approved. So this week I'm working on communications, getting the online grants management system ready for it before we release that to the public. And we hope to fund up to $750,000 worth of projects this time around in the categories of fishing, innovation, community, and safety. So if anybody has questions about that, please reach out, and you should see something hopefully by the end of this week. Second, Empire Wind has their fisheries compensation claims period open. It'll be open until October 13th. So you can go to, I think it's epwindcompensation.com. But also if you go on the Empire Wind website, it's front and center. But I can also probably put that in the chat here for anybody who fished over in the Hudson Canyon area or any shoreside services in New Bedford. Also, finally, the Regional Fund Administrator, which is currently designing a process for offshore wind fisheries and shoreside claims, is struggling to get fisheries engagement. They are going to be here the week of July 21st. They're looking to meet with fishermen in New Bedford. So if yourselves or anybody that you might know are looking to give their feedback on what a just claims process looks like in terms of who should be eligible, both fisheries and shoreside services, please reach out to me and I can facilitate that. And that's all I have today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Brad. Questions for Brad? Bradley, any hands raised?
I'm not seeing any hands.
Thank you much for your presentation, Brad, and we look forward to hearing from you on updates from time to time at commission meetings. So we're moving on to other business. Anybody around the table? Other business for next month's meeting? If not, I'll move on to public comment. And Bradley, you're going to have to call off the names. You'll have to recognize the public.
Sure thing.
Public comment?
Sam Pick.
Sam Picard, you're recognized.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I want to first thank everybody for letting me speak today. And this is about the lobster changes for the Outer Cape Zone. And I wasn't sure that everybody was aware. Some didn't write down who the new member was, so I apologize. The reason, which I'm not sure if he was aware of, the reason that the V-notch wasn't in this emergency management, because Maine and New Hampshire did not vote for repealing the V-notch because it was a separate, it was a separate bullet point in Amendment 32. That's why this did not get linked in. And I'm curious why nobody on this board made a motion to include it with this, why it just got passed through. And yes, I realize there's only 30 or 40 of us that are affected from this, but if Maine is out of compliant, New Hampshire's out of compliant, why is Massachusetts not protecting all of its fishermen? Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Dan, would you like to address that?
The commission, the ASMFC, there were 8 votes to not include changes to the V-notch. It wasn't just Maine and New Hampshire. And so that's the first answer. And then the second answer is the emergency regulations that we passed back in late April brought forward that which was in Addendum 32. So this commission really didn't have an opportunity to change those rules through this rulemaking process.
So this board could not add to that motion to repeal the new V-notch rules?
No, because that rule was in effect in January, or on the books in January. And the only thing that we repealed through the emergency rule was that which was in addendum 32 on gauges and on vents.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Anybody else, Bradley, from the public?
I'm not seeing any other hands.
Well, then I would just like to close this meeting. I'll need a motion to adjourn, but I wish everybody a safe, healthy, and productive 4th of July weekend. I'll need a motion to adjourn, and I'll need a second.
I can make the motion, Ray.
Shelley, thank you. Who's going to second the motion?
Khalil Hill, second it.
Khalil, thank you. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.